Hello and welcome to Hightailing Through History, a history podcast where two sisters get high and surprise each other with a story from history's vault of the weird and the wonderful. I am the firstborn sister, Laurel.
Like how you say it, like it's like some like weird prophecy. I guess that makes me the last-born sister, Katie.
Yeah, our kid sister here. Yeah, I can't really get too creative beyond like eldest, firstborn. I mean, after that, I think you can't like the heir to the king. I don't know. That feels a little bit too much. But hey, we are also joined in the smoke circle today by Bryan Austin. He is the host of Let's Be Frank, an auditory almanac for the curious mind, and is also a first-person historical interpreter for a couple of America's founding fathers. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Just for historical context, primogenitor is a thing. So being firstborn and then being the spare, that's completely appropriate language.
Oh, the heir and a spare. So look at that. I'm even very tired.
You know, if you need a new title for your next podcast on really antiquated forms of hereditary titles, I'm your guy. Hi, everybody.
That's it. So, I mean, Bryan, before we even really get started into what I know is going to be our amazing time today, I want to first thank you for checking the box, helping me realize my dream of going back in my phone box time machine and plucking a historical figure out of time and bring it back. I get to feel like Ted Theodore
Bill
Logan.
And Ted, yeah. I was just going to say, could you imagine if that was real?
You know, that's really my whole that's what the entirety of my art is based off of, is giving people the Bill and Ted experience. Just a most excellent adventure, you know, at any point in time. I just happen to do it in really, really funny clothes, steeped in American aspirations. My pleasure. I'm so happy to do it. I'm so happy to hop on and talk history and talk about the ways that we share history, because I think we're in such a fascinating time where that's changing and we're questioning how best to tell our stories. So I'm super excited to be here in funny clothes and talk about that.
And I'm very happy that you wore the outfit for us. I really appreciate that. I was like, could you be Benjamin
I know,
Franklin
when you said
for
that,
us?
it's like, am I showing up in full dress? I was like, oh wait, there's costumes. I was like, ha.
I can, and certainly would be happy to. Should I just? I mean, how do we want to do this? Do you want to put a 5 on the table and I'll leave the room and come back in? How do we? I mean, no, I'm just kidding.
This is good.
I think it's interesting. The thing, so just to kind of, I feel like we should give a start of context. So I think, you know, it doesn't escape me that for the most part, people's only kind of the bridge or connection between teaching history and dressing up is the episode of The Office. You know, do you know the episode where Michael Scott hires a male entertainer, but what he accidentally ends up hiring is a Ben Franklin impersonator?
Oh my God.
Have you seen this episode? This is in season 2.
I have not watched The Office. Laurel probably has.
So it's a bachelorette party. And Michael Scott's like, I got someone sexy here. And it's Ben Franklin. And more than that, it's a guy showing up as Ben Franklin. And I don't want to start being Ben Franklin until I address the elephant in the room, because it's what he does is sort of how you introduce him, like, good day, my name is Benjamin Franklin, and here's what I did for America, and I'm here to talk about the founding of the country. And there is a lot of there's a lot of what we call first-person interpretation, which we'll talk about, which can feel that way because you have to, if you're going to immerse people in the past, you know, you have to kind of give them setting, place, person, time, and sometimes the way you do that can be a little clumsy. So I kind of get a chuckle, and when I first embarked on picking up the Doctor and saying, well, what do I do different than all the other people who are doing this? How do I make a connection when there's already so many people doing it in great ways, but also really kitschy ways? And so you have to address the elephant in the room and say, yes, that's one way to do it. It's not the way I'm trying to do it, but if I don't do it right, it could at all times. I'm one step away from that satire. It's the tightrope I walk at all times.
I'm sure. And I guess, I always like to know how people, like how all of our history friends, they got to where they are. And I know you have kind of an interesting journey as to how you got to being a first person historical interpreter.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about that?
This is a weird job to quantify on a resume. It really is. And how I got here is a pretty weird road. So I decided when I was 12 years old that I wanted to tell stories. I'm a really awkward man. I'm a super awkward man. I say with my silk cravat and spectacles, like, it's ridiculous. I'm absurd, but I was a really weird kid. And like, I was the kid who pined for the days of silk cravats and spectacles. So I'd be so stoked to be doing what I'm doing. But I was also an only child. So I had this world in my head that I wanted to live in. And I sat and melancholy at the world I did live in and all that. So, 6th grade, we did this like play in class, and it was Sherlock Holmes in the case of the Speckled Band, and I got picked to be Sir Gramsby Roylott, and here I was, this really shy kid who didn't really have any friends, and for some reason like went for it in that moment, like that single moment, and suddenly me feeling like who had never been noticed, never been special, never been unique. I suddenly felt that kind of like electric pulse of like, ooh, this is a weird fixed moment in my life where things will never be the same, wow. And I went home to my parents, who are both accountants, and said, Mom and Dad, I want to be an actor. And they were like, all right.
That's so cool.
And yeah, that's
the reaction.
Sure.
Like, yeah,
all
okay.
right.
Yeah. And that's where, that's where it kind of started. And that telling stories, it molded through a variety of different facets. A year later, I wanted to be a stand-up comic. The next year, I wanted to be a puppeteer. The next year, I wanted to do film. And I've kind of done all of it over the course of the winding road to get myself to where I am. But the one thing I never deviated from was a great love of stories. And so when I left college, I was successful as a professional actor. I worked at regional theaters all over the country. Like, I had work, which was great, but I was dissatisfied at the same time. And I was looking for what I wanted to do, because I felt like I wanted to do more. I wanted to connect in deeper ways. I wanted to leave an impact in ways that I didn't feel like I was succeeding. And so in 2012, I had an offer to go to Texas to do a summer Shakespeare festival. I was really big for a time into not only Shakespeare, but also like fight choreography and sword fighting. So I did like different fight direction for companies too. And instead, I went to clown school in Humboldt County, California. Speaking of hightailing through history, Humboldt County has a small association with certain vices, but it also has a clown school in it, and an amazing clown school called Dell'Arte International, which Commedia dell'arte is a form of theater that we get a lot of our clownish archetypes. And so it's an Italian form of theater. And this school is built not only in that, but also in devised theater. And devised theater is this really beautiful form of organic theater where you show up with a group of people and you don't necessarily have a script. You don't necessarily have a story. What you have is an idea, and you come to the table and you simply say yes. And art happens. And it was magic to me. It was so cool. And I was like, there's something to this. And while I was in this place, I had my face painted by 2 traveling hippies the night before. I had a job interview with Colonial Williamsburg. Now, the funny thing about this, I had a Skype interview with a person who is now a vice president at Colonial Williamsburg, and the hippie makeup wouldn't come off my face. I could not scrub off this makeup that they had painted on my face. So my Skype interview, like, I had like just like these itinerant hippies were like, we're going to paint your soul on your face. So my face was covered in soul. And there it was, this job interview. Just a smattering of soul. And that was the first job offer I got with Colonial Williamsburg, and it was as somebody who it wasn't as a character. It was somebody who checked, made sure people had tickets, made sure people know where they were. It was in costume, so like cool rock and roll, but it wasn't yet what we call first person interpretation. That I hadn't arrived there yet. So I got to Williamsburg. I didn't know anything about history, not more than the average person, and about a month in, I got an audition to be one of their actors. So moving from third person interpretation, how we talk history in the past tense, into first person. Now, what that means is you are putting on the name of somebody from the past. These experiences that happen to you. Washington crossed the Delaware versus I crossed the Delaware with Washington. And so I was like, I auditioned, and it was mostly so I could, get a bump in pay. But I was also like, maybe they'll make me somebody cool, and like I can wear a sword or like ride a horse, and it'll be great. And then they picked James Madison for me, who is the opposite of that. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know, if you ever want to see a boiled spaghetti made a person, it's James Madison.
Really?
He's great. He's so great.
Oh no.
I didn't feel like I was that. I never considered myself very intelligent. I never considered myself very smart. It was really intimidating to suddenly look at somebody who was only intelligence and didn't have a ton of social skill. And I remember the first day I ever stepped out in the funny clothes and had that, like, okay, I'm a performer. This is the character I'm playing. It was like there was a sign, like, or a target painted on my back that, God, any moment someone's going to call me out and be like, "You're a fake. You're a phony," even though I am. Like, it was such a strange feeling, and it was 11 years ago of learning history by walking it. I was 25 when I started, which was the same age Madison was when he entered into public life, and I'm 36 now, which is the age Madison was when he's working on the Constitution. And so it's been a really fascinating way to experience someone's life, and to leave an impact, because, doing it for 11 years, suddenly a kid you met who was, 8 when you met them is now voting. So that's been a pretty cool thing. And, Franklin came about in a kind of a weird way, only because, I keep getting fatter and balder, and people keep asking, "Are you Ben Franklin?" So finally I was like, yes.
No. Okay.
Yes, I'm going to be Ben Franklin. I'm going to lean
That's
into
just cool, man.
I'm going to lean into that inner Franklin, baby. And there's other reasons why the podcast, came about, but, I think it's the work that I've done has been predominantly in front of live audiences. And this has been this experiment because we're in this, COVID shook everything up, changed everything up. We live in a world now of short form content. We live in the world where we connect with people who we have never seen in the flesh, who we feel deep connections and friendships with despite it. These digital salons in which we suddenly find ourselves are real avenues where conceivably we're framing the institutions and museums of tomorrow by the content we create today. And that really fascinated me. That really kind of that allured me to this idea, or rather this question of like, is this something people could like? Is this something that people could get behind? And it's kind of evolved, over time. Season 1 was this spring, and I didn't get in front of a camera. It was all just my voice. And season 2, I started stepping out more and more into the content that I was creating. And I don't know how the bar is going to get raised for season 3, but it's been really fun seeing how the work changes. So for instance, really for the past 11 years, when I step out and I'm a character, I assume everybody around me is going to be in the same year that I'm in. So for instance, if I'm going to be James Madison for a school, all of these kids are going to be in 1787 with me. And that's fine. But what's great about this work, suddenly, when it comes to Franklin, it kind of turns it on its head, said, no, everybody else is in 2023 and I'm having to be here with you, which means suddenly I'm learning alongside you what it is. And it's all so dumb because we know it's play, but it's also effective because it's play. We're suspending disbelief. We're teaching history in one of the most ancient and effective ways, which is storytelling. You know, before we had academic history, we had Herodotus and Thucydides, and all of that.
That was
a long
answer.
Gorgeous.
No, that was my favorite answer. That was my favorite answer I've heard. And like your path and your journey that you've had, I think it's amazing. I really am looking forward to talking with you more about your time as a first-person historical interpreter. And we're going to be having a longer chat about that. So if you want to hear that, which I know you do, because it's going to be a fascinating and amazing discussion based on based on your last answer you just had, go over to our Patreon and we're going to have that interview up over there. I know we've got a Patreon. Like I'm doing it slowly but surely. We're doing it. We're getting official. There. Yeah. So, Dr. Franklin, we usually at our shows we are imbibing in some way. I know it's a little bit earlier in your day, but are you drinking anything with us today, from like water to a coffee or anything like that?
Miss Rockle, it's never too early in the day, but I do practice all things in moderation. Eating not to dullness, drinking not to intoxication. Today is simply tea, but not East India tea, mind you.
See that.
And if you notice, upon my mug is a particular phrase. The camera somehow inverted the image, which I'm entirely fascinated by how this works. But it says huzzah, which is an honorary and sign-off of my time. An abbreviation of his honor, meaning the king's.
Oh, nice.
Which is why the French's is hooray, ray being king in French.
Oh, right. Oh. And look at this. Already learning so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. How about you, Katie?
I have my little can today. Itty bitty. With a little bit of CBD to keep me relaxed so that when we're done here, I can handle my tarantula with ease. And a little bit of liquid courage, perhaps.
All in a day's work for our Katie. That's how we roll. I'm partaking in some green tea with jasmine. Quite a fan.
Jasmine tea.
Jasmine tea.
Uncle Ira would be so proud.
And my cup has
God,
Clark Gable as Rhett Butler in the 50th anniversary of Gone with the Wind. I guess I found this at a resale shop recently, and
of course,
if I told you, I nearly had tears in my eyes by the time I found it, and it was just sitting by itself on a little shelf, and I was like, "Mr. Gable, coming home with me."
You really need to put some scotch in it so that you can make a pun of, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a dram." You're welcome.
Shit. All right. Make a note. Scribble that down. Thank you. That's a good one. Frankly, my dear, I'll give it a try. People of the Smoke Circle, we are going to be each telling you a little story from history. And whenever we have guests on the show, we generally like to pick our topics in a way that relates to our guests, their interests, connects to them in some way, or is adjacent to their area of expertise. And so Dr. Franklin's going to kick it off for us today with a little bit of history from his time. A
little bit of history for your time. But to start, we have to go to the future, at least in my time. So our story is going to begin in the 1990s. Now, travel with me to London, just several blocks away from Trafalgar Square, where Nelson stands atop his column. Upon Craven Street, an old townhouse sits dilapidated, a ruin, falling apart. When a society comes together and decides to salvage that home, make it a museum to teach about a famous person from history who lived there, a man well known for his intellect, talent, and diplomacy, stunning good looks, me. And so they began renovations of this particular property. They do paint analysis to determine the colors of the various rooms. They repair the cracks in the plaster. They go down to the basement. And in the scope of historic preservation, it's always prudent to determine what might be below you before you add things atop, which means archaeology. And so they dig. They dig to discover and uncover the past. And one of the things they find on a particular day is a human thigh bone. Now, this isn't uncommon. London is a city built atop the backs of bodies, but in this particular instance, they uncover not only a thigh bone, but in short succession, other bones. Not just one body, not just two, but by the end of their time, 6 bodies. Now, it's not just the quantity of bodies, not just the diversity of ages and genders, but also what's been done to the bodies. Skulls that have been sawed in half, thigh bones with marks carved in them, evidence of bodies being tampered with. And so the coroner was called, the coroner of London, who examined the bones and discovered that they dated back to the time that Ben Franklin lived there, that I lived there. And what the devil was I doing with these bodies? What the devil was I doing with my 16 years in London? Well, I confess the answer is not as exciting as you think it might be. Don't go editing your Ben Franklin fan fictions yet. So while I was in London, I was involved with a high amount of society, not just the Royal Academies, but innovators of science, of thought. I frequented the coffee houses of London, not just the ones for the lawyers, but the ones for the botanists, the scientists, the politicians and polymaths. And while I was doing that, I made the acquaintance of one Dr. William Hunter. Hunter was a famed anatomist, and in what was radical for the time, did his studies of anatomy and work not solely upon the poorest of society, but also upon the aristocracy. Now, William Hunter had a young protege by the name of William Hewson. So 2 Williams. This is a tale of 2 Williams. Now, while I lived in Craven Street, I made close personal acquaintance with individuals who would eventually become my family in London, being separate from my children, oftentimes over the course of those 16 years, and my dear Deborah, my wife. Those 2 women who I lived with were Miss Margaret Stevenson and her young daughter, Polly, who in all respects was a daughter to me. Polly and I saw the coronation of His Majesty King George III. We were there for that. It was Polly who helped reserve the seats for that particular instance and occasion. But Polly made the acquaintance of William Hewson. And while a partnership was being fostered by William Hunter and William Hewson, a very different partnership was being facilitated by young Master Hewson and Miss Polly Stevenson. So Dr. William Hunter and William Hewson formed a partnership and decided that they would build an anatomy school, meaning a school and a place where people could pay admission to see medical demonstrations, study anatomy. We live in a fascinating age, you see, where we're questioning everything. It's an age that perhaps posterity one day will call an age of enlightenment, despite various things which contradict and move against those ideas. But because we're questioning everything, there are no there are no rules, there are no regulations, there are no methods whereby man might elevate themselves. They're simply people who wish to do something and oftentimes will do it. So they formed this anatomy school so people can come and study medicine, make these advances. However, Dr. William Hunter begins to get very frustrated with young William Hewson, who the more time he spends with Polly Stevenson, becomes more obsessed with her anatomy than the anatomy of Dr. William Hunter. I'm making a double entendre, you see. So, this home is built. The 2 gentlemen start squabbling over the bodies that are being utilized for that anatomy school. Dr. Hunter does not want Mr. Hewson involved coming into the house when Dr. Hunter's not there. Mr. Hewson wishes to take some of the bones to make a skeleton, and Dr. Hunter doesn't want him to. Very quickly, their friendship begins to sour, and Dr. Hunter comes to me, knowing I'm a mutual connection of both. We spend an afternoon wherein Dr. Hunter gives me all of the complaints he has for young Mr. Hewson. And the nature of this document can one day, perhaps in your time, be compared to two young middle school girls endeavoring to solve their grievances by going to a third party. It gets very, very catty. Dr. Hunter is very, very upset because at one point Mr. Hewson goes on a trip away and takes much longer than he said he was originally going to because he got diarrhea, and Dr. Hunter's really upset with that fact, so much so he mentions it in the complaints to me. Dr. Hunter's really mad because at one point Mr. Hewson took a bunch of bones out of a bunch of different buckets to try to make one skeleton out of a bunch of different bodies. Just really, really odd complaints, really strange complaints. And it's very evident in Dr. Hunter's complaints that he doesn't wish for the friendship to continue. He doesn't wish to be his enemy. He just wishes for their tenor to come to its natural conclusion. The final complaint he makes to me is that he feels somewhat ashamed that he should come to me and have to make these various complaints, knowing my particular affection for young Mr. Hewson as well. To which I will say, it matters not to me, because I should wish in this instance to do what good I can in remedying the friendship. And if I cannot, should see it to its natural conclusion, having good regard for both of them. Their friendship will not recover. That anatomy school will eventually close. Mr. Hunter, or Dr. Hunter, will go on to have an illustrious career and will contribute various things to the field of what will one day be called obstetrics, that will make numerous advances for that. But Mr. Hewson will have to utilize the Craven Street home for his salvaged anatomy school, the 6 cadavers that will eventually be buried. Now, the question is this: you need to utilize a body while it's still somewhat fresh. This is why, in terms of interring the dead, the risk of grave robbing is highest in the first 10 days that a body is buried, which is why oftentimes relatives and connections would watch over the body for the first 10 days to ensure it's not meddled with. But once those bodies have decayed and are no longer utilized, Dr. Hewson was faced with somewhat of a dilemma. What do you do with them? Do you then return them? Well, the identity of numerous cadavers at that point wasn't known. So what do you do with a body that is no longer of utility to you? Now, Dr. Hewson interred them in the basement as likely the greatest method or modicum of respect he could warrant. But in leaving those skeletons in the closet, he left more questions than answers for those who discovered those bodies 200 years later. Now, the unfortunate thing for Dr. Hewson was that would be one of the last things he would undertake. He would die a number of years later. And the ironic thing about it was Dr. Hewson's field was in hematology, which is the study of blood. Dr. Hewson, one day when working on a cadaver, slips with a scalpel, and in the intermingling of that will receive an infection of the blood, which will be his short undoing.
Wow. Wow. Well, hey, we are so glad those skeletons aren't yours, Dr.
I will say it's way better than him being a serial killer. So
do you know if I don't, well, maybe, do you know if, here's a fascinating question. So if we talk in terms of property, right? Mm-hmm. If we speak in terms of natural liberty, I realize we're moving away from history and into philosophy. But if we speak of the natural liberties of John Locke, so for instance, life, liberty, property, what will later constitute as the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. Property is a natural right. Yes. So we warrant you have not only a property in yourself, the ability of self-possession, the ability to acquire and possess, but also the methods and means of those things which are appropriate to yourself. At what point does your body cease becoming your property? And if it doesn't sit as your property, does it pass to your heirs as their property, as other things? So, for instance, furniture, or does it become commonwealth, meaning the property of the world, of all? This becomes a fascinating legal foundation for an argument towards grave robbing.
Argument for grave robbing? Or
I'm not a lawyer.
No. Hey, neither am I. Well, thank you very much for that. That was a brilliant piece of history. And I know that's one that comes up sometimes.
I'm so excited to hear that story, because I remember when I tried to click on the article that came up one day, it was like, nope, you've got to be a subscriber. So when you're like, he's going to talk about the skeletons, I was like, yes.
And then the extraordinary thing about that is you can tell by the two primary sources that survive of Franklin trying to work things out between Dr. Hunter and Dr. Hewson. Hewson worked really hard to get those bodies. He really did. He really needed those skeletons. And so it is neat to see how these things are framed, and also to explore the rabbit holes that you often go down in uncovering history. So when I was doing the research for the episode I made about it, and in talking about this, you think the most exciting thing is, oh, how did the bodies get there? This is going to be so juicy. And then you go down there and you say, oh, well, it makes sense how they got there. But wait, well, let's talk about this friendship falling out, because that's way more interesting. And so I think it's a reminder that history dovetails in wonderful ways, and that if you let your curiosity win, you can go down some really fabulous tangents that give you a much richer story than you ever thought you could.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Let your curiosity win when you're going in these rabbit holes for history. It's really amazing. And I think that can give someone such a greater understanding of history as a whole, instead of these little pockets of stories. You're like, wait, I learned about this thing. It's that too. And it's this, and this has to do with that, or that sets the scene for this thing. And I love that. That's like one of my favorite things when I'm researching. Delicious history. So during America's history, she has had 5 states that almost happened. And today I would like to tell you about one of them, the lost state of Franklin. We're going to get a little exposition here. So a few decades prior to the Revolutionary War, 1756 to 1763, is the 7 Years' War, aka the French and Indian War, which was, just for the sake of simplicity here, is this imperialistic struggle between Britain and France for territories in North America. And once this war ends, the British Crown announces what they called the Royal Proclamation of 1763. It was meant to close down westward expansion beyond the Appalachian Mountains, beyond those 13 colonies. And it forbid private citizens and any of the colonial governments themselves from purchasing land or making any agreements with any of the indigenous tribes in that area. It was put into effect to help protect the colonists, because they're going west and they're invading the lands of these indigenous tribes, and are therefore being attacked when they're defending their homeland. And then also to protect native tribes and their settlements, as white people are going west and being like, this is our land now, and creating problems. So to help protect both parties of people. But what ended up happening is that they basically were like, jog on, what are you going to do about it, King George III, your majesty, curtsy? Like, you can't stop us from thousands of miles away. Off we're going over the mountains.
That is such the attitude that settled this country, dude. Like, yes, that's just, as I was going through mine, I was like, man, we haven't changed much.
There's some real stubborn people here in the States. And so while they're there, they branch out. They're making settlements in the Tennessee Valley, which what we would know today as Eastern Tennessee. Is bordering right on that Eastern Tennessee, Western North Carolina area. Land speculation was huge. And as far as the colonists are concerned, there's plenty of it around. You just have to, stake your claim to it, essentially.
Do you have a flag?
As they say. Yeah, or as they see it. In one of my sources that I read, which was actually a dissertation from Dr. Kevin Barksdale, that's his thing, is like the lost state of Franklin. And something that he was saying was the land, in terms of like stable trade, in air quotes here, was land speculation, like having land and also enslaved Africans. Those were their main forms of their currency in this region. And so if you're expanding all your land, you're the person that becomes the most powerful. It's huge, economic power and political power. They've broken one rule already by going west, so why not another? They start purchasing large chunks of land from the nearby Cherokee. So don't go west and don't buy land from the indigenous tribes. And they're like, check and check. What else do you want us to not do, basically? It's the early years of the Revolutionary War, and the settlers were under regular attack, or at least regular threat of attack from these local tribes, mostly the Cherokee. And so they asked for North Carolina. They're like, actually, please take us back. We need your protection. Please annex us back in. And North Carolina did in 1777, which I made a note to myself. I'm like, that just annoys me, to be honest. Like, you were told not to go west. You're like a little toddler. Like, we told you no. You did it anyway. Like, you fucked around and found out, right? This is exactly what this all is. But anyway, so North Carolina's like, we got you. Revolutionary War ends on September 3rd, 1783, and the Treaty of Paris is signed. The following year, January 14th, 1784, Congress ratifies said treaty, and then officially the United States is the United States as an independent and sovereign nation. And during the 1780s, the United States was in the Confederation era, which is post-Revolutionary War up until the signing of the Constitution. During the course of this, Congress is evolving as well. It's the Continental Congress and then the Confederation Congress until, the Congress that we know and almost said know and love today, but I was like, no, we know it today.
Know and are familiar with.
Yeah, are familiar with. That's it. And the Confederation period brought the 13 states into like this loose union before the Constitution existed. It was never assumed that these territories and landholdings outside the 13 states were going to just automatically become part of the 13 states. For the government, though, this area was a way to dig themselves out of national debt. Starting before the end of the Revolutionary War, some states that had Western landholdings were asked to cede their territories to Congress to help pay for the war. And North Carolina was one of the last states asked, and that was in 1784. The war had ended, Treaty of Paris had been ratified in January, and in April, North Carolina's like, okay, here's 4 of our counties, here's our Western territory, you can have this Congress. And that's what a bunch of the people that were living in the area were like, oh, wait, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon? You're going to sell us? Like, who are you going to sell us to? To France? To Spain? No, thank you. We are our own people now. And they set about taking matters into their own hands of like, we're going to establish our own state. A convention of delegates met together with Revolutionary War veteran John Sevier as its president. They decided to write their own constitution, their own Declaration of Independence, and become their own state in 1784. And just because news doesn't travel so fast during this time period, it's not like you get on your smartphone and you can find out the latest thing. North Carolina had given said land to Congress, but then in November 1784, it was like, actually, no, we're gonna keep this. They don't need it. We're good. We're gonna hold on to this. And
Psych.
But the people in this new Franklin, psych, exactly. They're like, well, we're just going to keep on fighting for our independence and be our own state. I think for them, knowing that they were potentially could be at the mercy of like this parent state. Now, remember, the delegation is all male landholders, and their land gives them power and money. And I don't think they want their economic interests threatened, which makes a lot of sense. So the delegation writes their own Declaration of Independence. They draft their constitution saying, we unanimously agree that our lives, liberties, and prosperity can be more secure and our happiness much better propagated by our separation. And consequently, that is our duty and unalienable right to form ourselves into a new independent state. Their original constitution mostly followed North Carolina's. Not too long after a second constitution is put forth, it was a little more progressive in that it, in addition to ministers, they're like, no lawyers, no doctors can hold public office. We're also going to add in a clause that no one can run for office that is of immoral character, gambling, drunkenness, engaging in lewd behavior. If you swear, break the Sabbath. But the delegates were like, no, we're good with what we've got. The Houston Constitution also uses the name Frankland for the new state, which, like, I know this is just my opinion, and my opinion doesn't mean anything, but I hate it.
I was going to say,
I like Frankland. I love Frankland. And thankfully, that's not what they landed on, but it was originally and remained Frankland as a nod to founding father Benjamin Franklin. And in fact, in an attempt to gain favor from said founding father, a member of the Convention of Delegates even wrote a letter to our dear Benny Franks saying, 15th of June, 1786. Sir, I make no doubt, but you have heard that the good people of this country have declared themselves a separate state from North Carolina, and as a testimony of the high esteem they have for the many important and faithful services that you have rendered your country, to commemorate you, they have called the name of their state after you. Your most obedient, humble servant, William Cock.
What a suck up.
Mr. Franklin penned a very polite letter back, but offered no public backing. But it was very nice, very polite, as a bit of a good for you, Godspeed and good luck on your endeavor sort of thing. Franklin partitioned the Confederation Congress for statehood, but failed to secure the 2/3 needed to become America's 14th state. John Sevier, who is the delegation president I mentioned earlier, and ended up being like the de facto leader, governor, he started having power struggles with another Franklinite leader, John Tipton. And then another ingredient to add to the doomed to fail cauldron is that they're still under frequent attack from the local native tribes. Treaties that they had made with some of the tribes weren't upheld by others, obviously. And then the United States government, a bigger government, and let's face it, real government, is also making treaties which start to conflict with ones made with Franklin. So it was a real mess. But they stuck it out for 4 years. For 4 years, they like really tried to just hold on to like us being a state of Franklin. And unfortunately, it's a bit of like an anticlimactic ending here. But John Sevier decided to make a bid for aid from Spain, from Spain. I put the Spanish from Spain, the Spanish from Spain. And that, it went over with Congress as well as I just said it. So Congress was like, I'm sorry, you're doing what now? We call that treason around here, and arrested him.
Oh,
yeah. So once that happens, the state of Franklin soon collapses, and that land is ceded and then later becomes the state of Tennessee. Our old John Sevier, he not only miraculously escapes serious punishment for these charges, but later manages to become the first governor of Tennessee. So
there's a little sneaky devil.
There's a little civics lesson, which is a bit concerning for American civics. But that's how we have this weird lost state of Franklin, America's almost 14th state.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they gave it a good old college try, didn't they?
They did. They really tried. And they stuck around the longest. Like I mentioned that there were 5 would-be states at some point, Franklin being one of them. But the Franklin one is the one that lasted the longest for 4 years. Do you guys want to hear some of the other 4, or are you good?
I would,
yeah. Okay. So I thought they were really interesting, and I just kind of like loved having nerdy thought experiments about them because I was like, some of these are really fascinating. Some of them are dumb reasons, and some of them are like, wow, that would have been really interesting if that went through. The first one up is Deseret. Deseret would have been a massive state. It basically would have been almost all of the West of our modern day United States of America. Jeez. It would have included modern day California, Oregon, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Wyoming, and Idaho.
Wow.
8.
Those states on their own are massive.
Right.
Holy moly.
Yeah. So just superstate them all together into Deseret. It was proposed by Mormon settlers in 1849. But in addition to like the sheer size of it, because it would have been so big as a state, a lot of people weren't on board with the polygamous practices of Mormonism. So a lot of people were like, no, we can't have that. They're going to turn all of the United States into and turn to Mormonism. That was the anti-Mormonism rallying cry. But
so they got Utah.
They got Utah. That's what happened. Yeah. And there were some hurdles even as they were like trying to petition to become the super state. But it all really ends in 1850. The Utah Territory is established, and Brigham Young, the Mormon leader, becomes the first governor. And so that's why Utah is such a big place for Mormonism. I was like, that makes a lot of sense. I think what's interesting though is like for years after, the some Mormon elders would secretly meet after the Utah Territory General Assembly meetings, and they would like ratify laws under the name Deseret.
Wow.
They're like, we're going to hold on to Deseret.
It's their secret stage name.
I was going to say.
Doesn't that sound fun? Deseret. Deseret sounds like a fun,
Please
like
welcome to the stage, queen. Deseret.
Ooh. The crowd goes wild. Deseret. Yeah. I mean, that's how I've been pronouncing it in my head. I'm probably going to get somebody that emails and says it's Desiree or something like that. But so that was,
we'll know.
Yeah. So that's number 2. Hey, everybody. This is editing Laurel here for a moment. In the story that I'm about to tell about Sequoia in a second, the source that I used made it seem that Sequoia was going to be 2 territories in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Territory and the Indian Territory, and that they were going to be 2 separate independent states called Sequoia collectively. But when I came back to put in like maps and a visual aid for this section, I realized that actually wasn't really going to be the case at all. Maybe at some point they talked about having 2 independent states, but really it was always going to be the Indian Territory in the eastern part of Oklahoma. So I just want to make that clear. I did try to edit out a few places where I say 2, but there's one point in the very beginning where I say 2 and it just didn't edit out very nice. So I wanted to make sure I made that distinction and made that clear. All right, let's get back to the show. The next one is Sequoia. And this was a plan to create 2 individual states for Native Americans.
I think I've heard of this one.
Yeah, this is one's really interesting. The plans began in the early 1900s during a meeting of the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole nations. And the region that was in question was eastern Oklahoma, call it Sequoia, which was named after the creator of the Cherokee writing system. Oh. Loving it. Their rather progressive constitution that they made was really expansive, and it included restrictions on child labor and antitrust laws. Unfortunately, the state of Sequoia were not ratified by Congress. Congress just didn't want to add 2 new Western states, so they said no. But the Constitution of Sequoia lives on because a lot of future states then directly copied portions of that for their own state constitutions. And I also read that the yearly conference on Native American issues that's held by the Cherokee Nation, they still call it the state of Sequoia.
Wow.
Interesting.
These last 2 are a little bit childish, but I'm going to go there. So the 4th almost state was called Absaroka, which came out of discontent during the Great Depression in 1939 and began in Sheridan, Wyoming. So a little shout out to our friend Aaron Odom from Euripides Eumenides. That's where he's from. And they're a group of politicians and businessmen wanted to create a new state, which encompassed large parts of Wyoming, Montana, and South Dakota. And their whole thing was like, we're going to hear grievances from our new citizens, air quotes there. They even handed out license plates that said Absaroka on it. And they even had a Miss Absaroka. She was the first, the one, and the only, the first and last. But I feel like that's when you know you've got a state, when you can enter her in the Miss America competition as Miss Absaroka. But nothing more official went forward than that, and it just died on its ass. But that's Absaroka. The last one is Jefferson. And this began in 1941 when a group of copper mining countries in Northern California and Southern Oregon just got fed up with poor infrastructure. They didn't really have great funding for their highways as they're traveling back and forth over their mining territory. And so they decided to elect a governor of their new state, who was a judge named John Childs. They even took up a state flag and armed themselves at the border, well, their imaginary border of Jefferson, with a flyer that said, "You are now entering Jefferson," which I'm sure was confusing as hell for everybody that entered that was not a part of what was going on, who didn't get the memo. So yeah, the Jeffersonians were short-lived. They swore in their new governor, and then a couple days later, there was the attack on Pearl Harbor. So everyone then got started with World War II, but and that one also died on its ass, which sounds like it's for the better. They sounded a little bit excitable, if you will. So there is the lost state of Franklin, and 4 other would have been states for America. There you go. Thanks, guys.
If you love history, and it's obvious you do, or you wouldn't be listening to this podcast, then I think you're going to enjoy my podcast as well. My name is Aaron Odom, and I am the host of Euripides Eumenides, a theater history podcast. Yes, I recognize that the title of the show is hard to spell. Now, do you need to be a theater history nerd in order to enjoy this show? No, you just have to like stories about the strangeness and hilarity that history can sometimes be. It just so happens that all my stories revolve around theater. For example, I've had episodes on why vampire musicals have never been successful, how clowns used to accompany funeral processions to honor the dead, and how one of the biggest pest infestations in America occurred all thanks to William Shakespeare. Euripides Eumenides can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, or wherever you get your podcasts. And both Euripides and Eumenides start with the letters E-U, and I bet you can figure it out from there. Join me, Aaron Odom, for Euripides Eumenides. I'll see you at intermission.
What a delight it's been to have Bryan on with us to immerse us in that Benjamin Franklin experience. We really loved hearing about how he's been bringing history to life, and we continue a really fantastic conversation with him on his adventures in first-person interpretation and what the future of history content is looking like. It was a really wonderful chat, and honestly, it really affirmed for me why I love doing what I do here on Hightailing Through History. And so if you want to hear that, that's up on our Patreon called Best Buds. What? If you want to be our best bud, that's up now. If you want to hear that interview and also just help support what we're doing around here, it's massively appreciated. That's patreon.com/hightailing through history. Or if you go to Patreon's homepage, you just search for us in the bar, you'll see our little logo will pop up. Exclusive content such as the interview with Bryan and our other guests, behind the scenes content, our half-baked episodes. We're just going to be adding more and more in the new year for you. But there are other ways to support us for free, which is also massively helpful to us in our little indie podcast. And that's rating and reviewing on the platform you're listening on. Subscribe, follow, maybe share your favorite episode on your social media. And we would love to connect with you. We're on TikTok, Instagram. It's all listed and linked directly in our show notes below. And when you follow, please say hi. That's one of our favorite things. We wrap things up with the history of the Boston Tea Party, which celebrates its 250-year anniversary in 2023. And with that, let's puff puff pass it on to part 2. Katie, would you like to bring it on home?
Let's crack these knuckles. Let's get to it. So I bring to you today the real story of the Boston Tea Party.
Ooh. Clink, clink, everybody. Clinkety, clink, clink, clink.
Hold on.
Tea time.
We all just bash our cameras. Like, there you go.
Everybody.
I did actually have tea while I was writing this. And I looked over and I was like, that's a bit ironic. And I was like, all right, fantastic. It was as it should be. So this December 16th of this year, what year is it? 2023, will be, sometimes I don't know, it will be the 250th anniversary of said Boston Tea Party. So we're going to talk about it.
Woo.
To understand this event, we must first, well, let's not jump in a rowboat. That would take a long time. But we're going to head over to England for some brief backstory. So on May 10th of 1773, British Parliament passed the Tea Act, which awarded the British East India Trading Company a monopoly on tea sales within the American colonies. So the East India Trading Company, this is how Britannia described it, as a monopolistic trading entity that began as a result of England participating in the East India trade for spices and whatnot. And it did, when I looked it up, it said it was associated with the Silk Road, but it was the naval part of it. But later also, it kind of said, because I wasn't sure, because I was pretty sure that Silk Road was older than that. And they were like, I mean, you could infer that it is part of it, but it was more like a waterway of it. And I was like, all right, well.
So when we talked, just because I've been going back and doing the old episodes, when we talked about juiciest with like the trade that was going through the South China Sea, that was when we talked about like the British ships that were going through there. That's the East India Trading Company. Yeah. So yeah, they were like that naval trade route to East Asia and amongst other things. But yeah.
Well, this specifically in
that
this
makes sense
story,
why you say that.
Yeah, we're focused on like goods, not, Right. So essentially, the Tea Act was the British government, the Crown, issuing a bailout for a company on the brink of collapse. So the East India Trading Company was suffering from massive debts that stemmed from actually annual contracts that they held with the Crown that totaled up, I'm going to assume back then it was a lot. It was £400,000 per year that they all, because there was multiple contracts. Go ahead, look it up. I see you.
£400,000 in what year?
1773.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
So in addition to having contractual obligations to the Crown of England, they also were having financial difficulties with unstable political and economic climates in India, where a lot of their goods came from. So it makes it harder to procure these goods and then make the sales. And the European markets were actually already weak from the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War that we spoke about earlier. So it did weaken trade for them as well. So the East India Trading Company was failing at this point in time. It was, and interestingly enough, yes.
I have the answer. So this is giving me dollars, American dollars, as opposed to pounds.
Yeah.
But we have $15,982,909.09 in today's money.
Alrighty then. So they were super, super broke. So, where was I? At this point in time, it was interesting because everyone considered this company, which, I don't know about everybody else. I'm only familiar with it because of Pirates of the Caribbean. It was too big to fail. So the British government kind of had to scramble to save it. So by passing the Tea Act, the British gave the East India Trading Company an almost complete monopoly over the American colonies, as far as specifically, yes, in tea trade, obviously, because that's where this is going, but with other things as well. So this meant they could bypass the colonial merchants, so local merchants. They didn't get a hand in the deal, which kind of throws off a local economy, because they would have sold on behalf of the company. And they even undercut the Dutch tea price. Apparently, there was a big Dutch tea smuggling thing going on. Like, it's mentioned multiple times, and they were like, yeah, the good Dutch tea, because it was the most popular one in the colonies. I was like, okay, so apparently Dutch tea is superior to English tea. I myself partake in much of the Irish tea, so there you go. Well, you know, the berries, like, if you leave that tea bag in long enough, your spoon will stand straight up, man. That stuff gets strong. And Blake tried it one time and goes, this is awful. I was like, no, that's real tea. That's how you start your day.
Yeah, builder's tea. There it is.
Oh, yeah, man.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. So the Tea Act actually imposed no new taxes on colonists, right? So the tax on tea was actually the Townshend Act of 1767. Too bad it wasn't 69. Anyway, so not only did it tax tea, it also taxed glass, oil, lead, paint, paper, everything.
Oh, no.
So due to the protests of that Townshend Act, it was repealed on all commodities in 1777, 3 years prior to where we're at, except for the tea. The crown wanted to maintain its right to tax the colonies. Hard to imagine. So
that tea.
Yeah, man, they weren't letting it go. So while the tea tax was not intended to actually anger the colonists, it fundamentally angered them to have a government-sanctioned monopoly on tea. So they were upset about that. More like the morals of it all. They weren't actually getting taxed any extra than what they already were with that original act. So the Tea Act was a direct threat to merchants of Boston, especially at the time, because that was a big harbor, big port. So merchants such as John Hancock, who he hatched a plot, got together and hatched a plot with some other devious minds. The group called themselves the Sons of Liberty. They disguised themselves as members of the Mohawk tribe, so take that as you will, and secretly boarded 3 ships in the Boston harbor. They destroyed over 92,000 pounds of tea on the night of December 16th in 1773, which, by the way, I'm going to guess was probably really freaking cold. And also, I have a question here. I'm going to side quest off for a second, as I am so apt to do with my ADHD in full swing. Wouldn't that kill the fish in the harbor?
So do you want to know something incredible?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So the tea that they're throwing into the harbor is a mix of bohea, hyacinth, and oolong. They throw so much tea into the harbor that it affects the flavor of the fish for the next several months.
What?
So here's the incredible thing about tea in the 18th century. It is not being shipped in loose leaf the way you might conceive it today. The tea is actually pressed into these very dense bricks. And so you have these crates of tea that are pressed into these bricks, these cakes of tea. So to give you context of how much tea, they're not dumping loose leaf tea. They're destroying these concentrated, heavy crates that are then taking a long time to dissolve into Boston Harbor.
Holy crap.
And so it changes the flavor of the fish, but they live.
So they do live. Why do I love that you had that answer? So that how they press that into bricks, that's how I get my sphagnum moss that I put in all my animal things, because it's easier to ship. Stop making fun of me. Stop laughing. I can see you. It's the easiest way to. Do you know how expensive that shit is? It's from New Zealand, dude.
I'm really excited for the sphagnum moss party of 2023 to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, where you just dump that shit in a kiddie pool and call yourself a revolutionary, baby.
Right? I mean, it is the easiest way to get it because it lightens it per bulk. You're actually paying less and getting more. So I'm excited about this. Man, I didn't know that. That is definitely the more efficient way to ship it. I had no idea we did that back in the 1700s.
Yeah. That's amazing. What an amazing little fact that is.
Do you think that they enjoyed the taste of the fish and then they were like, damn, it's all gone. Somebody needs to get back out there and start dumping tea. Or maybe not. Wow. Maybe it was dreadful. Who knows? Thank you for that. I'm so glad you had that answer.
Oh, so good. Thank you.
So initially, the colonists never even let the tea be offloaded when the ships would pull up. They would say GTFO, and they would send the ships right back to England. They were like, we don't want what you're bringing. Get out of here. Once again, we haven't changed much as a country. So, however, in some places, the East India Trading Company would unload their tea, right? Get it all off on the docks, at which point your little dock loading guys pull it and bring it to the merchants. In protest, they would sit and let it rot right there on the dock. They're like, nope, we're not doing it. We're not picking it up. So there was much discontent amongst the revolutionaries. So the 3 ships that were boarded on December 16th, 1773, were the Beaver, Dartmouth, and Eleanor. So the governor and chief justice of Massachusetts at the time refused to let the ships return to England. So they docked in the harbor, and they're trying to get everybody calmed down, sorted out, peaceful. Didn't work, obviously. As you can imagine, opinions on this act of vandalism were actually varied. Some colonist leaders, such as John Adams, was thrilled to hear the Boston harbor was now swimming in tea and changing the flavor of fish for months to come. While others, such as jolly old George, were strongly disapproving of the destruction of the tea. He was not happy about it. So Washington, like many others, held that private property, it's a protected thing. You don't mess with it, right? That's somebody else's stuff. It's not yours. Don't touch it. And Benjamin Franklin, we know him.
He's like,
even insisted that the East India Trading Company be reimbursed for this crime, and even offered to pay for the lost product himself. Because he was with Washington in that this is wrong, this is not the way to go about it. Very moral men. So, as with most things, it was still used for a tool for political propaganda. So whilst in private, Washington was disapproving of it, he wrote on June of 1774 that the cause of Boston ever will be considered as the cause of America, right? So he's kind of spinning it to serve a revolutionary purpose, we shall say. It also meant that the British government closed the port in Boston, which would hit us hard economically, as at that point, a lot of their almost everything was, if you don't have that port open, you're not getting goods, you're not getting probably fish, for eating or anything like that. So not good. So they closed the port until the damages were paid for and annulled the colonial self-government in Massachusetts. So can't hold your own elections and stuff anymore. You lost your privileges. And they expanded the Quartering Act. The Quartering Act is where local government had to house and feed soldiers of the English government, right? So they're like, they're there, they're yours, you got to take care of them though, whether you want to or not. There was even a second Boston Tea Party in March of 1774 when 60 or more men, in disguises of course, boarded the ship called the Fortune. And this time they sent about 30 chests over into the harbor. And this act of vandalism was less effective than the first attempt, obviously. But that was about, if I remember how many chests it was, I thought they dumped 62 the first time, so they only got about half this time, which is still a lot of tea. So, which leads me to wonder, was the fish still flavored? We may never.
Maybe they did it to reflavor the fish.
When you said that, I was like, oh my God, wait till we get to the second one. Do you think that's what it was?
This fish has been boring these last few months. Let's shake things up again. Yeah.
I need some oolong in my cod. This isn't working for me. This lobster is incredibly underflavored.
Do you know how much tea in total was destroyed during the Boston Tea Party? I don't know the exact number, but it was a lip-ton of tea. Yeah, that's...
Oh, no.
I hate myself.
That. No, I love that.
I hate it. I hate it so much.
Oh, man. As me, I was like, yeah, it was right. And then he said that.
What?
The sad part is I feel like sometimes I'm too, literal for fun puns. I'm like, oh, as the joke sails right overhead, I'm like, damn it, I'm only 4'11". There it goes. Oh,
just catch it.
That was gold. No, I caught that one. My catcher's mitt was ready, girl. I was like, whatcha?
Yeah. Yeah.
So for decades, after the event, no one knew actually who was responsible for the destruction of the tea. That was not talked about. Even after American independence, they still could have faced criminal charges, civil charges, and condemnation from the leaders at the time, like Washington, Benny Franks. Even today, we still don't know the identities of everybody involved, except for John Hancock, who I think was kind of a loudmouth. I'm starting to understand the more I learn about him. That's why he was yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's something right there, like, look at me. I could be wrong.
That was a big giant signature for everyone who's not watching.
That was his big giant signature, because he wanted to make sure everybody knew he was on there.
Bless.
So the event did not earn the name of the Boston Tea Party until a newspaper references it, probably in jest, I'm going to guess, as the Boston Tea Party, in the year of 1826. So much later on. And in the 1830s, 2 books called A Retrospect of the Tea Party and Traits of the Tea Party then introduced the term. And at that point, it was cemented into pop culture. And that's what it was called. It's printed in our history books. I don't know if you had it in your history book, Laurel. I definitely did. Yep.
How old do you think I am?
Calm down. That's not where I was going with it. I just didn't know if you remembered. Because I just remember specifically it saying that. And I was like, that's kind of like, when I found out that's what it was called, I was like, that's a bit funny to then print that in a history book instead of calling it the Boston Tea Incident or something. But,
okay.
Well, anywho. So that is the story of the Boston Tea Party in its, dirty laundry aired and truths fulfilled. So there it is.
There it
Bravo.
is. Wow. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, I definitely feel in a party kind of mood now. That's good. Actually, when this episode comes out, it will be December 15th. So when you hear this episode from it's the day before the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. Thank you, Katie.
You're welcome. 250 years ago, man.
Right.
It's such a neat time to look at American history because, we're walking towards 2026. And so these sort of benchmark events that we consider to be kind of all happening at once, like history happens at once. Francis Bacon has a great sort of statement around that of time is consistent. Everything's happening at once, but we have a real opportunity to study history as it's sort of happening. So December 16th, you've got the Boston Tea Party, with 2024, you have the colony's responses, how they respond to the Boston Tea Party and how those responses cause equal and opposite reactions to Parliament that eventually bring us to April of 2025 and Lexington and Concord. So it's neat to sit and be in the middle of all of these things.
It really is. Yeah. It's really, really cool. And it's really great that we get to share these moments and this excitement that we have about these sort of things in history. We get to share them with other people and experience this all together. And so we're, it's a bloody delight is what it is.
You get to be friends.
We get to be friends. I love being friends. Well, thank you both of you for having such awesome stories. I just love when we have these guest episodes and we can kind of tie these things together a little bit and
the MVP coming in with sweet tea knowledge,
yeah, man, flavored fish. That's amazing. The 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party coming up, which I believe you are going to be covering a lot of that on your show. Then is that correct?
That's right. So season 2 of Let's Be Frank is called Spilling Tea. So with season 1, I had kind of a Chasing Independence, which the Declaration of Independence was sort of the climax of that. And so this season, I've got an episode not dropping this Monday, but the following Monday, Spilling Tea Part 4, which is going to be sort of a summary of how the tea got there. So from the vessels leaving England to getting here and everything. And then on the anniversary, I've got an episode on the Boston Tea Party coming out. So that'll be, I think, the day after this one comes out. Okay. So I'll be able to sit in that episode and be like, hey, if you want a great time,
hey, come hang out. Come join us. There's always some room for everybody here.
So yeah, I've got one coming out on the anniversary.
Brilliant. That'll be great. Yeah. So all of your social media handles, links to your podcast, we're going to have that all directly linked in our show notes below, so that way you can connect with Bryan, because I mean, it's been such a delight getting to know you. Like I said earlier, like all the history people that I meet, you guys are all my best friends now, and
my heart
forever and ever and ever. And so we definitely would love having you back in the future if you feel so inclined. And we loved having you on today. Thank you so much. In the meantime, folks, get money, get high, give love, and Katie.
I mean, learn about Benjamin Franklin. Like Benny Franks is where it's at. Not to mention also Benny Franks, but like
all about those Benjamins, baby.
Get them Benjamins.
Or
got Washington's.
I've got Washington's. Me too.
And it hails with some more Washingtons.
Oh, doesn't it? Especially with the 25 centers. Nailing them.
Bye, folks.
Bye.